Good morning, Rabosai. Good Erev Shabbos. We have a Talmud Torah sponsor of Dovi and Nina Elman in honor of their daughter Ayelet becoming Bas Mitzvah. May she continue to be a source of nachas to the entire family. And a Daf Yomi sponsor, Binyamin Fleischman, thanking Rabbi Silber. Thank you to all our sponsors. Today's Daf is Mem Ches in Pesachim. We're picking up actually on the top of Mem Ches. Mem Ches, of course, is Moach in Hebrew for the brain. And Mem Ches is 48, which is also famous in Pirkei Avos. We have the 48 ways to wisdom, which is the sixth Mishnah in the sixth chapter of Pirkei Avos, and it has a whole list of different paths to self-improvement. So the 48 ways to wisdom is highly recommended. There are books on that topic. There's a lot of hashkafa, a lot of musar in there, and it's very useful, actionable information. It's better than any modern self-help book. It's a self-help book written about 2,000 years ago and more, so it's highly recommended. So we're on Daf 48, 48 Ways to Wisdom. It's a good remez, and we're on the topic of ho'il. Ho'il is a very famous topic in Shas. Ho'il means since, and the entire concept is since you need food for guests, you can cook on Yom Tov. Remember yesterday we said he already ate his Sudas Yom Tov, so he already ate on Yom Tov. Guests might show up and you want to have fresh food available. We said that it was the meat of Avraham Avinu. When guests would show up, he would cook them fresh food. And the Gemara in Yuma we mentioned yesterday said Avraham Avinu kept Kol Torah Kula, even the Durabanans. What was the example? Was the Eruv to cook from Yom Tov to Shabbos. So he would even have fresh food prepared for guests because Avraham Avinu's midah was bringing in guests. Of course, if he hadn't eaten his Suda on Yom Tov, the Shulchan Aruch brings that you can cook whatever you want on Yom Tov. You can be marbe b'bishula. You can cook a lot of different dishes. And so he's going to have a lot of leftovers for Shabbos, but he's cooking right now for his Sudas Yom Tov. He could be marbe b'bishula. The Shulchan Aruch says he should taste from everything on Yom Tov. Lechatchila, he should taste it all. And then he's going to eat it on Shabbos. Good, but he's cooked it on Yom Tov for Tzorach Yom Tov. So this Ho'il we're talking about is even though the man cooking, he already ate his Sudas Yom Tov, but Ho'il, guests were going to show up and he needs to have hot, fresh food for them so he can cook for the guests right now on Yom Tov, and it's not doing any problem. So what we were doing at the end of yesterday's discussion was we were trying to disprove Ho'il. So Rabbah had this attack on Ho'il from this statement that someone was cooking a gidanasha in milk and he was chayev 5 times. And one of those 5 times was havara, was making the fire, lighting up the fire. And they say if he's chayev on that, that doesn't make sense because that disproves Ho'il, because he could tell you, Ho'il, that I need the fire to cook food on Yom Tov for my guests, I need to have fresh food available. I shouldn't be chayev on havara, I should only be chayev 4 times instead of 5. Of course, we're going to give him malchus on the gidanasha and the basar b'cholav and cooking basar b'cholav and all this, but for the havara, he should be pater. So what Rabbah's suggestion was take out Havara and put in Atzei Muksa. I'm just speaking outside what we did at the bottom of Mem Zayin. He says it's Atzei Muksa. They said, well, you hold Muksa's deraisa? He says, yeah, I hold Muksa's deraisa. Remember we said, Hechinu et asher yaviu, that there was a concept Moshe told Am Yisrael to prepare the man in advance, to designate it, at least by the peh, to say it was for Shabbos. And so he held Muksa was deraisa. He said, no, you can't hold like this, because then we brought this was the last thing we were doing on the top of today's daf. We brought this Perush on Yechezkel, this drasha from this pasuk in Yechezkel about what's fitting to be a carbon and what's fitting for Nesachim, and we said that only things that have their own inherent flaw, they were tevel, or they were meiser, or they were a palgas, they weren't the right age of an animal, these were things that were not able to be a carbon. That's what Yechezkel was teaching us, and this excludes something muksa. And so we're continuing in that vein on we left off on the first wide line on Mem Ches, but we're going to do what's called the running start. We're going to be 4 lines up in the small lines. The 4th line from the top says Ein Mevi in the Sachim in the Tevel. We didn't. This is his Rabbah's drasha in Yechezkel, and it's the disproof that Rabbah holds Muksa's deraisa. Ein Mevi in the Sachim in a Tevel. Tevel is of course mixed chulin and that hasn't been tied. You haven't separated out the tithes. Yachol lo yavim in a muksa. You might have thought you also can't bring from muksa. Amratz hama tevel miyuchad iser gufu garim lo. Tevel, the problem is an inherent problem in the item itself. These grains or this wine has not been tithed. Af kol iser gufu garim lo. So the only things disqualified from mizbeach are something that's an inherent flaw in the item itself. Yatsa muksa she'ein iser gufu garim lo. This excludes muksa. It's not an inherent flaw in the item. Ela iser davar acher garm lo. The problem is not the item. The problem is it wasn't set aside. It wasn't designated. It wasn't brought into the temple and put with the animals that are going to be for karbanos. It's a perfectly good animal itself. It just wasn't brought in and set aside for Yom Tov or Shabbos. The I amrat iser muksa deraisa. And if you're going to tell me, Rabbah, that muksa is deraisa, Mali Isser Gufa, Mali Isser Davar Acher, then Muksa should be an inherent disqualification in the item if Muksa is Deraisa. So Rabbah, you can't tell me that Muksa is Deraisa. Oh, then also Rabbah, Ha'atu, it was you, De Amrat, you told us, Chiluk Melachos l'Shabbos, there is a division of forbidden labors on Shabbos, but there is not a division on Yontav. What does this mean? If you did more than one malacha at the same time, we just learned Maseches Shabbos. It's a little old because we did Maseches Erevin already, but here we are halfway through Pesachim already. But in Shabbos we said there's 39 avos malachos, and if he's doing the av and the tolda, he gets one. It's one problem. It's one carbon. But if he's doing multiple av malachot at the same time, avot malachot, he could get more than one carbon at the same time. So that's chiluk malachot l'Shabbat. He might be high of 3 or 4 karbanot for one act on Shabbos because he's doing different av malachos. Ein chiluk malachos yontav, but there's no chiluk on yontav. So if Rabbah is telling us muktzas deraisa, then it's inconsistent with what Rabbah taught that there's ein chiluk malachas liyontav because we're talking about a yontav case here. He's cooking the gid nasha and milk on yontav itself, so muktzah shouldn't even be a chiluk for Rabbah. So we disproved Rabbah. So we can't say that this person who's cooking the gid nasha and milk is chayav 5 times. We can't say that Rabbah's substitution of muktzah for harvara is valid. Ela abik havara, rather we should take out havara v'ayel atse ashera. And what was the 5th avera that he's doing? He's using atzei asher. He's using firewood from an ashera tree, an avodah zara tree. V'azhara mechacha, and it's usher to use avodah zara. And the warning against it is from here: lo yidbak biyadcha me'uma min acherim. It should not stick to your hand anything from the iser, from the avodah zara. So you can't have any benefit from an avodah zara. Amar le Ravacha berei de Rava. So Ravacha, the son of Rava, says Labaye. So if the problem is using avodah zara, there's another isser associated with avodah zara, which is bringing any avodah zara into your house. So you couldn't bring the firewood into your rishus, into his chatzar, if he's cooking the house, into the house. So it's not just one malchus for using asherah firewood, it's actually 2 different ones. So then instead of being chayav 5, he's chayav 6. So it's interesting, we're here in January and people are throwing out their Christmas trees. And it's an interesting thing. There's a Gemara in avodah zara that talks about how you can't do business with the Nochrim around their holiday because they're celebrating their holiday and you can't buy leftover things from their holiday. So we might think, the post-game I don't think mentioned Christmas trees, Dafka, but the Tosfos over there, he says that for a lot of them, it's what we call minchag avoseichem b'yadechem. They're doing what their fathers have always done, but they don't have such a religious connotation to it. And I'm not paskening here. I'm not telling you to go out and use leftover Christmas trees to bake your challah. I'm not saying that. I'm saying the Mefarshim even 500, 600 years ago said that the non-Jews in their days weren't so attached to their ritual practices as they had been, 2,000 years ago. So there was a discussion then in the Rishonim that they weren't so. It was sort of a minhag for most of them. They say for the priests, for the religious leaders, it was different. They were very attached, but for the common person, they weren't quite so attached to their avodah zaras, and maybe it wouldn't be quite the same level of Isser doing business with them. But that's a discussion of the Rishonim. It's interesting. You can't bring it into your house. So I had a kasha once. It was a shaila I had. Somebody gave us a tchotchke. And the tchotchke was a little statuette, little itty bitty statue of a fiddler on the roof. So of course it was a Jewish guy. He gave us, it was a cute little housewarming gift or something. A fiddler on the roof. It's a very Jewish thing to give a guy. And I asked my Rebbe, who was a Pesach at the time. I said, "Is this a shaila? It's a statue. It's a little weird for a Jew to have a statue. It's strange." He said, "It's not really a problem to have a statue, but what you should do is, since the statue has, he has fingers and he has ears and a face, you should take something off. You should remove a finger, an ear or something, and make it not a shalom anymore. And that way, if ever an idolater comes and he's looking for something to pray to, he's not going to pray to this because it's missing a finger, it's missing an ear. So you get the Dremel and you grind something off and you make it not a Gishmak Avodah Zarah and not a Gishmak statue. It's not an Avodah Zarah unless an Ovid Avodah Zarah prays to it. But this little statue was not, I took the Dremel to it and made it not a Gishmak statue for Avodah Zarah. We have the same concept by wine, that the Ovdei Avodah Zarah used to pour out Nesachim, libations. They would pour out wine to their idols. But they wouldn't use yain mevushal. They wouldn't use cooked wine because it's considered less of a quality. It's considered not as gishmak as raw wine. So that's why we don't have such a problem by yain mevushal. If you have a cleaning lady, you have someone come into the house. If you have yain mevushal out, they're not going to use it for their nesachim. We're not choshesh going to use it for nesachim because it's not as gishmak. So too, if you have like some sort of statue or something and it's not a shalom, it's missing a digit, it's not so gishmak to pray to, we're less concerned that the Ovdei Avodah Zarah will make use of it. So good. That's our tangent about statues and yain mevushal. El apik havara. So whether we should take out havara. So it's not firewood from Asherah is the fifth one because that would come to 6 averos. El apik havara. Take out havara. Va'ayil atzei hekdesh. He used atzei hekdesh. So he did me'ila. He used consecrated firewood. Ashar mechacha. And the warning instances from here. Ashreihem tisrachun ba'esh. You should burn their Asherah ba'esh, lo tasun ken l'Hashem Elokechem. But you cannot do the same to Hashem your God. Now, we're saying you could burn the Asherah with Aish. The problem we suggested before was he was using the Asherah as firewood to make his Gidonasha cheeseburger. So you cannot get benefit from burning the Asherah, but you're supposed to burn the Asherah. You're supposed to get rid of the Avodah Zarah. For some of them, we grind them up, throw them in the Yam HaMelach, destroy them, burn them up. So by the Asherah, you can burn it, but you can't get any benefit from it. So you can't do the same to Hashem. Interesting, the Rambam says, in Eretz Yisrael, there's a mitzvah is to go find and destroy the Avodah Zarah. It's a search and destroy mission. And he makes l'chiluk in Chutz La'aretz, you have a mitzvah to destroy Avodah Zarah if it comes to your hand. You don't have to go out and find Avodah Zarah and destroy it. So we don't have to go looking in secondhand stores for little statues and grinding them up. We don't have to do that. But if it comes to your hand, if someone gives you a little statuette, okay, you could make it puzzle for Avodah Zarah. But you are supposed to burn it in a Asherah, but you can't get a benefit from them. Amar Rabbi Rachama, Halder Rav Chisda, Rabbi Machlokes. So we haven't. So to sum up, we haven't disproved Hoil from this fact that this guy cooking his Gidonasha in milk is chayav 5 times because we didn't have a valid substitution for Havara. So it's not a disproof to Me'ila, to Ho'il, not Me'ila, not quite the same thing. So we're comparing now to a machlokes we had of Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Eliezer, and this goes back a few days, that their problem was if you have tamei dough. Rashi explains your dough was tamei, but you haven't been mafresh challah. So now you have a serious problem, and it's Pesach, so it's getting worse. So if he's mafresh challah, he can't bake it because that wouldn't be ochel nefesh rabbosai, because it's Yontav, it's Pesach, and if he separates challah tameya, the Kohen can't eat that. And this is what we do all the time now. We separate challah and we burn it because we all have tuma issues. We've all been to funerals, we've been around things that are tameh. We're not so careful anymore, so we can't give our challah today to kohanim. It's challah tameya. So he has the same problem. He has a dough that's tameya. If he's mafresh challah right now, he can't do anything with it. It's going to come to become chametz. He has to leave it sitting there. It's going to become chametz. He's got a problem. Rabbi Eliezer said, no, he should bake it all right now. We're going to see. Well, we're going to see the explanation. So we're going to see if that's a proof or a disproof to Hawil, this machlokes we had a couple days ago on Mem Vav between Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Eliezer about what to do with your dough that's tameh, because you're going to have an issue of challah tameya with it. Good. So Had Reb Chisda Rabba. So this issue this discussion between Reb Chisda and Rabba we've just been discussing about this malchus 5 times for these 5 different veras, including Havara, Machlokes, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua. This is the same Machlokes, Rabbi Eliezer, Yeshua. To Rabbi Eliezer, Savar, Amrin and Hoel. Rabbi Eliezer says we do say Hoel. Rabbi Yeshua, Savar, Lo Amrin and Hoel. Rabbi Yeshua says we do not let you apply Hoel in that case. What's the case? Amar of Papa, Dilma Adkan, Lo Kamar Rabbi Eliezer Chasam, doing a Hoel. So maybe Eliezer only says that we don't say Hoel there. Ela be'idna de ka'ayel tanura, when he's putting this dough into the oven, this dough which is tameh, kol chada v'chada chazile lididei. So what's going on is every loaf is rawi for the baker himself. So Rashi says what the problem was afagav the sofa lahafresh achas mehen challah. What he's doing, he's baking a lot of loaves, but his dough is tameh. So he's going to, at the end, separate one of these loaves challah. That's what he would normally do. And it's not ochel nefesh because the Kohen can't eat that loaf because it's tameh. So Rabbi Eliezer still says chol. Lo bayi ve'i bayi lo mafresh chada lechala, because if he wants, this in the Rashi, he doesn't have to separate one for challah. Ele botza mikol chada v'chada. He could take off a little bit of each loaf. So instead of separating one roll for all of them as challah, he could take the corner off of each one as challah. And so each loaf itself, each time he puts a loaf into the oven, or a matzah in this case, understand their matzah wasn't like our matzah. Their matzah was thicker. We had a gemara before, is up to a tefach. A tefach is pretty thick, Rabbosai. So if you've seen the Teimani matzahs, they're definitely not a tefach. They're like an etzba. They're like a finger thick, but it's still much thicker than the shmur matzahs we get today normally. But the Teimani matzahs are still, they're thin by ancient standards. But you can imagine that's what he's doing, is each time he's putting one of these in the oven, Rabbi Eliezer says it's chazi for him. It's appropriate for him right now because he can take off the corner of it and eat from each loaf. It's really a matzah, or it probably looks more like a pita, but it looks more like a Teimani matzah. So he's saying, so maybe Eliezer disagrees with Hoel. He would say Hoel by using the Tameya dough, because each loaf is rawi for him, for the baker himself. But here for Hoel in general, for guests, de la orchin chu de chazi, it's appropriate for guests, because he's already eaten his sudas yantav, as we said, and he's now cooking extra for guests that could show up. So it's only appropriate for guests, lididei lo chazi, but for the baker himself, it's not chazi. Maybe Rabbi Eliezer will not say hoil. So to sum up, Rabbi Eliezer says hoil. You can bake all your loaves from your tameh dough, because each loaf he could just break off the corner as challah, and the baker can eat that dough himself. The baker's not a kohen. He's not concerned with eating the challah tameya. But maybe for guests, he wouldn't say hoil. He wouldn't apply the concept of hoil because it's for guests. It's not for himself. So a baker could do the tircha for himself because he could eat from each loaf by breaking off the corner as challah. But for guests, maybe Rabbi Eliezer doesn't agree with the concept of hoil. Maybe it's not. That's not the attack. Adkan lo kamar Rabbi Yeshua chasa. Maybe Rabbi Yeshua only says over there by the tameya dough, de lo amrin and hoil, that we don't say hoil there. Because there's one loaf in this whole. He's baking a lot of loaves, a lot of pitas, a lot of matzahs at the same time. One of them is not going to be fitting, not for himself, the baker, and not for orchim, because it's going to be challah tameya. Because what Rabbi Yehoshua is saying is you can't take off a corner from each one. You can't bake all of the pitas, all the matzot right now, and just break off a corner as challah. You're going to take one whole piece out as challah for the other ones, and that one is challah tameya, and no one can eat it. So it's tircha on Yom Tov that's not needed because it's not ochel nefesh, and you're doing a malacha on Yom Tov now by baking that extra piece, which is going to be challah. But here by the regular hoil, by hoil for the guests, cooking for guests that might come, cooking on Yom Tov, to chazi michas la'orchin, it's appropriate. This food is edible for guests. It's not challah tameya. It's just regular chula and regular food. So maybe Rabbi Yeshua would agree that we do say chol ba'orchin. So this machlokes of Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua, that about what to do with a tameh dough, if you can actually cook that, if you can cook all of it on Yom Tov, or if Rabbi Yeshua said you should separate some out as challah, even though it's going to come lidei chimetz, it's going to become chametz. This dough we normally do separate dough before we bake it. So Rabbi Yeshua says that's what we do even on Pesach, even though that dough is going to come into chametz. So maybe that's not a proof that Rabbi Yeshua disagrees with challah, because maybe that's only because that tameh dough will not be fitting for anyone to eat, but by hoel in general, because you can give it to guests, it's fitting for someone to eat, so maybe he would agree to hoel. Amru Rabbanan Kamed Rabbi Yirmiyah, the rabbi said in front of Rabbi Yirmiyah, Rabbi Zera, and Rabbi Zera, they said this explanation, that this chiluk about what Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua were arguing about was hoel, that their root machlokes was in the concept of hoel. Rabbi Yirmiyah kibla. Rabbi Yirmiyah accepted this explanation of the machlokes Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Zera lo kibla. Rabbi Zera didn't accept it. I don't think they're arguing about hoel. Amarle Rabbi Yirmiyah, Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Yirmiyah says to Rabbi Zera, Milsia de kashelan. There was this topic was very hard for us. We were working on this. But Asya kamashone. It's been in front of us for many years already. But my pligi Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua, what they were arguing about. Hasham Rua Mishmei the Gavar Rabbah, and now we've said an explanation in the name of a great man. velo nikvala, and you didn't accept it. This is an amazing thing. They were arguing and debating and exploring this topic kama shone for many years. Rabbi say, how many times did we get a kasha in the Gemara and we forgot it the next day? I mean, this is Daf Yomi. We're moving very quickly, you understand? But this is an amazing thing. So if you have a good question, write it down. Look something up. Think about it. You know, after shir, you could even Google it. Sometimes there's an article written. I've had times happen before where I was said that's kind of weird, and I Googled it, and there was some rabbi had written an article about that exact shaila in the Gemara. So it happens sometimes that you can find answers to your kashas, but it's a real amazing thing. They were debating this for years, and now they had an answer. They were very excited to have an answer for it. So we should be zoche to remember when you have a good kasha in the Gemara and you ask some questions, look for answers, and be excited when we get an answer. They're very excited. So he says I can't accept it. Amar le hey kabbalah. How can I accept it? The Tanina, there's a brisa. Amar le Yeshua le devrecha. There's a brisa that explains their argument a little better. That Rabbi Yeshua says le devrecha. He says back to Rabbi Eliezer, harihu over mishum lo tasei kumalacha. So Rabbi Yeshua is telling Rabbi Eliezer, if you bake all of this tamei dough into matzahs, then one of them is going to be the challah. One of them will be separated challah for the rest of them, and he will be over doing malacha on yantav, because that one is not ochel nefesh, because the Kohen can't eat it, because it's challah tameya, v'shasik lei. And Rabbi Eliezer didn't have an answer to him. V'isa, and if it's true that Rabbi Eliezer holds by hoel, he could say hoel, it's rawi. The baker could take off a corner from each one and eat it. Lei malei, he should have answered him. Time of the dibishim hoel. My reasoning that I allow him to bake all of the dough on Pesach, even though it's tameh, is because of hoel. Hoel, the baker could eat from each loaf. Amar le l'taimech. He says, for your reasoning, you say there's another statement, there's another brisa where Rabbi Yeshua answers Rabbi Eliezer, but if that's your line of reasoning, d'tznina, there's another brisa. Amar lo Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says, l'devrecha, to you, Rabbi Yeshua, harehu over mishum bal yirai bal yamatzeh. Says you say he should separate challah from this tamei dough and leave it and just bake the rest of the dough, but not the challah. It's going to become chametz. After 18 minutes or both, we're worried it's going to become chametz. He'll be over b'yirah b'yimatzeh. It's going to be chametz on Pesach v'shasik lei. Rabbi Yeshua didn't answer him. Hachanami dolo ahaderle. So you see, he didn't answer them. Hakam ahaderle. No, he did have an answer. In the Mishnah, in the Mishnah said, lo zehu chametz shemus charnalav mishum b'yirah b'yimatzeh. So Rabbi Yeshua's answer in the Mishnah to Rabbi Eliezer's kasha was, that's not the chametz we're worried about, which is an amazing answer, because Lamaisa, separating the dough as challah and letting it sit there, it's going to become chametz. You're going to have a problem with it. You're going to have to get rid of it. But he says, that's not the chametz we're worried about. So Rabbi Yeshua would let people bake a tamei dough on Pesach, even though the challah they separated before they baked it would potentially become chametz. So what's happening is he didn't answer him in a baraisa, but he did answer him in the Mishnah. Hachanami, that's what Rabbi Yeshua did. Hachanami, so to Rabbi Eliezer, he didn't answer him in the Mishnah, but he did answer him in a different mechilta, a different teaching. So there could be a statement out there, Rabbi Yeshua has a good answer to Rabbi Eliezer is a good answer to Rabbi Yeshua, and it could be his answer was hoel. He could say, listen, if you don't agree to be that, I do say hoel, that the man baking the loaves could eat from each one by breaking off a corner as challah. So all the loaves are chazi. He's not doing a malacha on yantav, and it's fine to do that. Tanya, Rebbe Omer, halacha Rabbi Eliezer. Rebbe says halacha is Rabbi Eliezer, that we would let him bake all of the tamei dough. Rabbi Yitzchak Amar halacha ke ben beseira. He says, no, the halacha is like ben beseira. What ben beseira said there was an answer that what you do is you do like Rabbi Yeshua, you separate challah from the dough that's tamei. Now you can't bake it on Yom Tov because it's not ochel nefesh, because Kohen can't eat it. What you do is you dip it in cold water so it won't come to chimetz. You keep it cold and it won't get ever warm enough to become chametz, and then he's going to get rid of it. He's going to remove it from his rishos. So he's not going to be over by Yimatzeh. But that was Ben Beseira's answer to make Rabbi Yeshua work that he shouldn't come to chametz, was to keep it cold. Good. So while we're on the topic, so we're kind of, Baruch Hashem, we've had a lot of hoel, and while we're on the topic of baking dough on Pesach, we say kama shir isa. What's the shir of isa? So Rashi explains the shir of isa, lalush b'Pesach, that you should bake on Pesach, lo yoser, but not more than the shir, sheyachol l'shomra midei chimas, that you shouldn't come to chimas, because we just had a problem of separating challah from a tamei dough. Rabbi Yeshua says you do it anyway, and Ben Beseira says you have to keep it cold so it doesn't come to chametz. So we say, well, how much should you do? Normally, how much dough should you be baking on Pesach that you can protect it. Rashi says it won't become chametz. Rabbi Yishmael b'no Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka Omer bechitin. He says if you're using wheat flour, kabayin, 2 kav. B'sorin, if you're using barley flour, shloshes kabin. If you're using barley, you should have 3 kabin. So it would depend on what you're using, how much dough you should make at one time, that you're able to keep it mixed, keep it moving, and not come to become chametz. Rabbi Nassan, Omer, Mishum Rabbi Eliezer, Chiluf Hadvarim. Actually reverse it. It would be 2 for barley and 3 for wheat. We actually saw last week there was a machlokes, which becomes chametz faster, wheat or barley. And we said there was a tzad to say that wheat is harder and less likely to become chametz, but the grains of wheat were permeable to water. They had a hole in them and the water could come in and maybe the grains could become chametz faster, whereas barley was softer and maybe that would become chametz faster, but it was also smooth. It didn't have an opening, the water wouldn't go in, and maybe there's a tzad to say it would become chametz more slowly. So wheat and barley have different aspects, and there's a machlokas here too about this, which becomes chametz faster. Because if you're using more, there's more of a danger, it becomes chametz, so maybe you should use less if it's an item that could become chametz more easily. Vatanya, but there's a baraisa, Rabbi Yishmael b'no Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka Omer, bechitin shloshes kavin. By wheat, there's 3 kav. He said 2 before, now he says 3. Besorin arba, and by sorin he says 4 kavin. So that's quite a bit more. Lo kasha, we say, no, that's not a kasha. He said 2 and 3 in one place, 3 and 4 in another place. Ha behasichta. One is hasichta, is inferior quality. It's sort of a lower quality grain. Habamaliyasa, and one is a higher quality grain. Amar Rav Papa Shmamina. So Rav Papa says you can learn out from this. Ger'in hite hasichta mechite mayilasa. So it's worse to have bad wheat than good wheat. Tefei, it's even worse. Midegaran sare hasichta misari malayasa. So it's more important to have good wheat than to have good barley. So the difference between bad barley and good barley is not as great as the difference between not inferior wheat and superior wheat. The ilu chasam, that there by the wheat, tilsa, there's a 1/3 difference. We went from 2 to 3, so that's 1/3 milabar, from counting from the outside. So going from 3 to 2, it's a 1/3 difference. Achariva, and here there's a 1/4 difference. Going from 4 to 3, 4 kav of inferior barley you could use. It won't come today to chametz if you're working it, and 3 if it's superior barley. That's a 1/4 difference. So that's so we see that wheat and barley are interact differently. We actually have this, that all the menachas in the Torah are wheat, except for 2 exceptions. Anyone know the 2 exceptions? What do we bring from barley? What mincha is barley? I heard an omer. I heard a shvuas. Did I hear a sota? Anyone sota? Also sota. So very good. So the carbon omer, which is matir all the grain, is actually barley. So it's an amazing thing. Even though barley is considered inferior, the carbon omer is brought from barley and it works for all the grains. And the mincha of a sota is brought from barley because barley is considered like an animal food. It's considered inferior to wheat on some levels. Obviously, you can use it. You can make matzah out of it. But it's considered more animalistic, and the sota was accused of acting on animalistic desires. So we bring a mincha from the barley, and it doesn't have any levona, it doesn't have any seasoning on it, because it's very very base, very animalistic. So we see there's a difference between wheat and barley. There's also a difference in the way they become chametz and interact like this. So Amar Rav kava milugna, the kav from milugna lepischa. That's how much you should use for Pesach. V'chen l'chala. That's also as much as the shear of chala. V'hatznan, but there's a Mishnah turning over to Amud Beis. Chameshes revayim kemach ve'od chayvin b'chala. So 5/4 of a kav of kemach, of flour, that's what's chayev in chala. So anything above that amount is chayev in chala. Hachi kamar kava milugnoi. The kav of milugna nami ahai shira kai. That's this shear. So this is the shear of chala. It's 42 and 1/5 eggs worth. The minhag is 5 pounds. We do take challah with a bracha, and over 3 pounds we take challah without a bracha, and under 3 pounds we wouldn't take challah bichlal. It's not the shear yet. We're going to see. Amar of Yosef Chani Nashi Dudan. Our women, where we are, nachug lemefa kafiza. When they bake on Pesach, they use only a kafiza, and Rashi says this is 3/5. That would be 3 pounds. So lepischa, that's what they bake on Pesach. These are smaller amounts, so they're not as they're worried it's going to become chametz. They want a smaller amount to work with at the same time. Amar le'baye maitatach. What are they thinking? Lechumra, they're going to be machmir to use a smaller amount so they don't become chametz. Chumra de'atidei kulahu. This is a chumra that becomes a kula. Why? Because they're removing it from challah. So they're not going to have a mitzvah of challah anymore. They're using such a small amount that they can't separate challah even with a bracha. So they're going to have a kula now using a small amount. So there's an amazing Shulchan Aruch. And you're going to ask, what am I talking about? But don't worry, it will become clear. The Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim Ches. Hilchos Tzitzis. Yit'atif b'tzitzit v'yivarech me'umad. You wrap in the tzitzit, which we're all going to do in 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and you say the bracha standing up. Beautiful. So the Magen Avraham says, you make all your brachas standing up, but there was one exception brought, and that was hafrashas challah. The Mishnah says you could make the bracha sitting down. So the Magen Avraham says, why? Yesh lomar de hafrashas challah eina mitzvah kolkach. Not such a geshmaka mitzvah, hafrashas challah. The eino osa elulatakin machalo. What is it doing? It's not really such a mitzvah. It's a matir. It's just to fix up your dough. That's why he's mafresh challah. So there, the bracha could be even sitting down. So the Gra, you're going to love this. Here we go. The Gra quotes the Magen Avraham, and he says, Devarov ein lahem shachar. His words have no morning. They have no light. As we would say colloquially, they don't get off the ground. Halo aser lasos isasu kabin, because you can't make your isa small. You can't make your dough small. That's exactly what the Gemara says. V'amrinan b'per gimel de Pesachim. We say right here, maidatach lechumra chumra de asi lidei kula. If you're going to be machmir using a tiny amount of dough on Pesach because you're worried about chametz, then you're not going to be separating challah, and it's a kula that becomes a chumra, that now you're not separating challah anymore. So the Gra says, no, Magen Avraham, you don't get off the ground. You have no shachar, you have no morning. This is a real mitzvah. It's not just a matir, it's a real mitzvah. This comes up also with this tension between, is it a mitzvah, is it a matir? We say a bracha. By yibum, there are times, yibum chalitza, we really do chalitza here, that what if somebody, God forbid, her husband passes away and she's very old already, but there would be a mitzvah of chalitza for the brother to do a chalitza, but she's 90 years old. She's not going to get remarried. I don't want to get remarried. What am I doing a chalitza for? No, what's the chalitza for? Is chalitza a mitzvah or is it a matir? Do we just need that for her to get married l'shuk, that she can marry another man? We're going to learn in Yevamos, or is it really? It's a mitzvah in and of itself that it needs a whole mitzvah. So that's the tension also here. Challah in a small amount. He says no, you shouldn't make challah in a small amount. You should make enough challah that you can make enough dough that you can come to doing the mitzvah of challah. So that's the Gra there, who says challah is a mitzvah, that you have the proof right here. The proof is in the pudding. The proof is in the dough. Amrlei the Avdon Rabbi Eliezer. They do like Rabbi Eliezer. The Tan Rabbi Eliezer Omer Harode v'nosin l'sal. So what do? They bake small amounts each. This kafiza, they bake it in small amounts, but they do like Rabbi Eliezer. Harode v'nosin l'sal mitzarfan. They take off their little loaves. Each woman has her little loaf, and they put them all in one basket. The basket joins them together l'challah, for the sake of challah. So what do? They bake 20 little rolls, or 20 little matzahs, and each of their matzahs was too small to take challah from, but they put them all in the same basket, and then they got together, they separated one of those rolls as the challah for the rest of them. So then they had enough in that whole basket. They had more than the shear. So even though they were, each woman contributed less than the shear, and each woman didn't take challah herself, but the women got together and took challah together. So it's an interesting minhag the Ben Ish Chai brings. When a girl became a bat mitzvah, she would have her first hafrashas challah. That was at the party. The women would get together and they would make a dough together, for Shabbos or whatever it was. And the little girl who just turned 12 and now she's a bas mitzvah, she would be mafresh challah for the first time. So it's an amazing minhag the Ben Ish Chai brings. That was their bas mitzvah simcha. Their party was a mafresh challah party. So you see the chashivas of being mafresh challah. So these women would get together. Even though each dough was too small for challah, they get together, join together, put them all in a basket, and separate challah. Amar Rav Yehuda Mar Shmuel halach Rabbi Eliezer, because they said the halachas of Rabbi Eliezer that you could join them together after you bake them. You could put them all in the same basket and mafresh one for challah. So lamaisa, we could do this if a woman forgot to take challah and the dough is already baked. Lechatchila we take from the dough. But if the dough is already baked into bread, it's already baked into challahs, you could put them all in the same container. It's best if they're touching, we're going to see, and be mafresh after the fact, one of them as challah. Amar Levi Hayit Marla, but we said about this, Amar Rav Yeshua ben Levi, Lo Shana, we didn't apply Rabbi Eliezer, Ela Kikarus Shel Bavel, only the Kikarus of Bavel, the rolls in Bavel, Shenoch Shchos Zeh B'Zeh, when you cooked them, they puffed up and they got together. The Rashi says, It's the first biggest, widest line of Rashi. They're wide and they're round. Ke'ein shalanu, like ours. So we see here that Rashi ate big, fluffy, round challahs, and we have a remiss to this. The Rosendorf rolls that you can get, they're attached together. You get like 4 of them or 8 of them, and they're sort of stuck together. When you rip one off, there's a chance a little bit is left behind. That's still a good challah roll. We see that right here, that Rashi had rolls like this. So Rashi had something like Rosendorf challah rolls. So that's a good endorsement for the Rosendorf rolls. Good. So no shazozo aval ke'achin. If they're like ships, they're independent. They're not touching each other. Lo, we didn't apply Rabbi Eliezer's halacha. Hayim marla, but we said on this topic, Amar Rav Chanina afilu ke'achin. Rav Chanina says no. Even if the rolls are not noshchos, they're not connected to each other. They're not touching each other. We still apply the halacha of Rabbi Eliezer that you could put them all in one basket and separate one for all of them, so the women could get together, even though each of their doughs individually was too small for challah. They could get together after and mafresh challah together. By Rabbi Yirmiyah, tavla she'ein la levaz v'zin mahu. What about if he doesn't have a basket, doesn't have a container, but he has a flat board? Could all the women put their rolls on the flat board, and would that link them together to take challah, one of those rolls for all of them? Toch kli be'inan. Do we need a kli with a toch, with an interior? So it has a rim and an interior. V'chal leika, and a flat board does not have that. Odilma aver kli be'inan. Rather, it needs the airspace of a kli. So even a flat board has this. Ha'ika teiku. So we didn't have an answer to that. So really, l'chatchila, you've got to use a basket. You've got to use something with an interior with rims also. Tanya Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Eliezer said, "Hatzal mitzarfan." The basket can join them up. So even after you've baked your rolls, your matzot, you can put them all in a basket and take one of them as challah for all of them if you hadn't been mafresh challah before. Yeshua Omer Tanar mitzarfan. Yeshua says even baking them in the same oven joins them all up. And you can take one as challah for the other, even without putting in the same basket. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Omer Kikarot Shel Bavel Shenoch Zom Mitzarfan. When they became joined together, like these Rosendorf rolls that are stuck together when they come out of the oven, like Rashi's rolls, that is mitzarf them for challah. Beautiful. So we've done chayil, we've learned about challah, we've learned about how to be mafresh challah after the fact. Good. The Mishnah says, Rabbi Gamliel Omer, Shalosh Nashim Lashos Ke'achas. He says 3 women can knead their dough at the same time. V'ovos b'taner achas, taner achad, and they can use the same oven. Zo achar zo, one after another. So what's going on is he says, well, one woman is baking, it's a small oven, so only one woman can use it at a time. When one woman is baking, the other ones are just waiting in line to use the oven. They're not necessarily moving their dough. And he's not worried he's going to come to chametz because it bakes pretty quickly. They get the oven nice and hot and it'll bake quick enough. Chamim omrim shalish nashim oskot bebatzek ka'achat. And the Chamim say not like this, rather the 3 women are all involved in their dough at the same time. What's going on? Achat lasha, one is kneading, and at the same time, achat orechet, one is arranging it into her rolls or matzot. Achat ofa, and the third one is baking it. So that's sort of an assembly line we're going to see in the Gemara. Akiva omer lo kol nashim. He says not all the women, lo kol eitzim, not all the firewood, lo kol tenorim shavim. Not everything's the same. You can't rely on everyone being the same, working at the same speed. Zeyaklal, he says, so you can't rely on this. On this, it might come for chametz because some women work more slowly than others. And while one woman's waiting, her dough might become chametz. Zeyaklal tafak titlush b'tzonin, and this is the rule. If it starts to become puffy, tapach is the same word as tapuach, as an apple, and also that was the mound of ash on the mizbeach was called tapuach, and it's sort of round. So if the dough starts to puff, that means it's getting gas inside from fermentation is beginning. Titlush b'tzonin, so you put it in cold water. Like Ben Beseira told us, if you're mafresh dough that's tameh, dip it in cold water, prevent the fermentation. So if they're waiting and the dough starts to rise, you got to quickly get some cold water on that and prevent it. Gemara says, Tana Rabbanan lo shahi, she is kneading her dough. So lasha, she kneads her dough. The first girl, mikatefet, and she starts to arrange her dough, to make it into rolls, to braid it, whatever she's doing. Chaver to lasha, and the second girl takes over, lasha tachtea, in her place starts kneading. So the first girl's moved on to step 2, and then the second girl's moved into step 1. Mekatafta, she finished arranging it. The first girl, ofa, she starts to bake it. Chaverta, and the second girl, mekatefet, she moves on to step 2, the arranging it, tachtea, in her place. V'hashlishis lasha, and the third girl starts to do the kneading. So it's an assembly line, we see. Ofa, so the second girl puts her dough in the oven. Lasha, off Ofa. So she's baked. The first girl's baked already. He losha. She starts to knead another dough. She goes back to step one. Chaverta, and the second girl Ofa. She puts it in the oven. Tachteya. Vashlishis, and the third girl Mikateves. And so you see it's an assembly line, Choseres Chalila, and they keep repeating. They go like stations. So one girl's always kneading, the second girl is always arranging it into loaves or matzahs, and the third girl's always baking it. And then they go back, they change places, and they keep going in an assembly line to basically keep it moving at all times. So the dough doesn't stop moving. The dough is being worked on all the time, or being baked all the time. Because as long as they're working on the dough, moving the dough, not letting it sit, it's going to not become chametz. The Rambam says an amazing thing. He says, afilu kulayom kulo, even all day long. So as long as the dough is moving and someone's paying attention and keeping it going and keeping it moving, it won't become chametz. The Ritva says in this Rambam, what? You can't do that. You can't leave a dough, even if you're working it, even in a machine, in a mixer. You can't leave it all day. That's gonna cause problems. He says lav dafka. So the Ritva and the Rambam have an issue over this, how dafka this is. Kozman she'osekes bebatzek. That as long as you're working on the dough, if that really means all day long. But Rabbi Akiva Omer, he said in the Mishnah, lokal anashim shavim. He says not every situation is the same. This is a klal in life. We're going to see. He says Tanya Amar Rabbi Akiva Danti lifnei Rabban Gamliel. He says I argued in front of Rabban Gamliel. Yelam Deina Rabbeinu, please teach us, Rebbe. Benashim zrizot, is this with fast women? Or benashim shein zrizot, they're not so fast. Beitzim lachim, with dry firewood, or beitzim yaveshim, with wet firewood or with dry firewood. Betaner cham, with a very hot oven, or betaner tzonin, or with a cooler oven. Obviously it's hot, but it's not as hot as others. He says it's not the same. Amar li, and he told me, Ein lecha ele masha shadach chachamim. He says, listen, we only have what our earlier sages taught us. Ze'akol, this is the rule. Tapach, if it starts to get poofy, it starts to come to fermentation. Titlish b'tzonin, you got to dip it in cold water right away. So you understand they're trying to keep it moving, but not every woman who's working as fast as her friend. You have 3 women on the assembly line, but if one of them is less zaris than the other ones might be waiting on it, and if it's 18 minutes, it's already a big problem. But even if it gets a little poofy, they've got to start dipping it in tzonin. So you see, it's a klal in life. Some people are zaris in some areas, but not zaris in other areas. So you can't assume everyone's the same. Everyone is important across the board, but you can't assume everyone does everything as quickly as you do. Mishnah, Si'or. Si'or is partially leavened. We're going to see partially leavened dough. Yisarif, you have to burn it. Ochlo pater, but it's not chametz. So if someone ate it on Pesach, he's not chayev. Siduk is the next stage up. It's more fermented. Yisarif, you have to burn it. Ochlo chayev. If someone eats it, it's chayev. It's mamish chametz gomer. Chayev karas. Ezehu seer. What is the seer? Kekarne hagavim. It's like the horns of a grasshopper. Rashi says sadik lekan, sadik lekan. So it has, I think we're talking about the antenna. I don't have a grasshopper here. I don't see if it has horns, but it has antenna that go in different directions. So there's little lines on top of the dough. That's kekarne hagavim. These little lines in different directions. Siduk, what is siduk? Shenit arvu sidakin zeveze. The lines are crisscrossed. The lines are touching each other. Divi Rabbi Yehuda. That's what Rabbi Yehuda says. Both the sior and the siduk, both stages are chametz gamar. You can't eat them. Ezehu seer, and which is seer? When the face of it is paled, like a person whose hair stands on end. You understand, a person's hair stands on end because he got scared, and his face gets pale. So if the color of the dough changes and becomes pale, that's the sign of seer. That's the first stage. That's when it's starting to become chametz already, and it's chayev. Tana Rabbanan, we taught Ezehu seer kosher hiskimu panav ka'adam she'amdu sorosov. So sior, this first stage of quasi-fermentation, it's not mamish chametz, but it's getting there already. It's when the face of it becomes pale. Siduk karne chagavim. And siduk is when you see lines on top that are like grasshopper antenna. Div Rabbi Meir, that's what Rabbi Meir says. Chachamim omrim ezehu seer, they say, what's a seer? Karne hagavim. That's when you get to the lines, like the antenna. Siduk shnis arvis stuck in zebezeh. And the siduk is the next stage when the lines crisscross. Ha'ochlo chayiv karis. And if he ate it, he's chayiv karis, it's mamish chametz already. But our Mishnah said, seer yisarif, ochlo pater. But our Mishnah said, this seer, this first stage, he has to burn it, true, but it's not chametz gomer. He's not chayiv karis. Div Rabbi Yehuda, that's what Rabbi Yehuda said. Eimol Rabbi Meir, but now the Gemara is explaining in terms of Rabbi Meir, zeh v'zeh ochlo chayiv, that either stage, the seer stage and the siduk stage, is chayiv karis because it's mamish chametz gomer. Amar Rava, my time of the Rebbe Meir. What's the reasoning of Rebbe Meir? Ein lecho kol sedek v'sedek milmala. If you have lines on top, she'ein lo kama sedakim milmata. You'll have crisscrossed lines underneath. So these lines are signs that there's fermentation going on, that there's gas forming, escaping from the action of the yeast in the dough. So that's what these lines are. They're like little pockets of gas escaping. So if you have little lines on top, that means you must have crisscrossing, interlacing lines underneath, and it's already changing into chametz. And this is a sign. We see this in some people. If a person is very angry or very expressive outwards, that means inwards they also have this. They have even more inwards. So sometimes we see that once it gets expressed outwardly, like the dough does in a person, that means kal v'chomer, they have more inside. Shkoyach Rabosai, good Shabbos, be well.